So I finally finished Unicorn Overlord. I know I neglected to use my blogger account to continue to document my first impressions of games I finished over the course of last year, having done so with Tales of Arise. That was the best game I had finished in 2024 and had a lot to say about it, aside from playing Mass Effect for the first time, which I ended up having so much to say about that I hit a writer's block. Thankfully, the media I consumed last year was extremely well documented with the help of my wife, and if you've seen our 2024 recap video, you know I was able to finish more games out of my backlog than I had in years, and remembered quite a bit about each one for our discussion in that very long video. But here we are in 2025, and much how I got obsessed with Tales of Arise in 2024 and binged it to completion in a short period of time, I did the same with Unicorn Overlord. One of the first times in years I finished a new JRPG within a year of its initial release. Soul Hackers 2 was like a year and a half after its release. Starting on New Year's Day, I picked the game back up and found myself completely addicted to it, and finished it on the evening of January 23rd. So what did I think of it? Honestly, it's probably my new favorite Vanillaware game at time of writing this, and ranks very highly with some of my other favorite strategy RPGs, such as Fire Emblem Blazing Sword and Valkyria Chronicles. Like most strategy RPGs, this game takes place in a fantasy setting. The Kingdom of Cornea lays in the center of the continent of Fevrith. In the prologue, we see the Queen of Cornea struck down by the evil Galerius, as one of her royal knights rushes her infant child to safety. Years pass, and that child grows up to be our protagonist, Elaine, whose mission is to avenge his mother against the odds and reclaim the land of Fevrith from the clutches of King Galerius and his empire of Zenoira. To break down each element of the game, starting with the visuals, it's no surprise that this game is absolutely drop-dead gorgeous. I am a huge fan of Vanillaware, particularly Odin Sphere and Muramasa. I've had a hard time getting into Dragon's Crown, and I own Grim Grimoire and 13 Sentinels, but haven't played much of either of those yet. So when I heard that Vanillaware's next game was going to be a strategy RPG, to me it was a match made in heaven. Vanillaware's visual style uses this 2D hand-drawn style that's very appealing, and the aesthetic motifs of their games always resemble this sort of storybook style. Like you're being told an old legend back to you, or you're reading about it in a history book, which is a common narrative framing for strategy RPGs, it seems. So either old history books, myths, legends, or fairy tales seem to be a common visual and narrative style for all of their games. Their games also take on the characteristics of a stage play. With this forced side-scroller perspective, you're always facing the characters from the side, and when you factor in these almost painting-like backgrounds and stylish dialogue, it's definitely reminiscent of a stage play. The battle animations are so well done, they're borderline addicting to watch, even down to the menus. There are so many tiny animations that play out during every single menu action, even the save screen. It's just so packed with detail, and the visual style looks like no other game out there aside from Vanillaware's previous works. The gameplay is actually extremely difficult to summarize, as I feel like I could be talking about it for hours and still barely scratch the surface of all this game's mechanics. It plays unlike any other strategy RPG you've ever played before. It's simultaneously very approachable and yet extremely mechanically complex. This game drip feeds mechanics to you a few at a time as to not get overwhelming, and does a good job with its tutorials, making for a first playthrough on easy or normal mode that is pretty accessible and not overly punishing, but if you're ever interested in peeling back the layers and giving yourself more of a challenge, you're in for a potentially extremely rich experience on hard mode that heavily rewards mastery of the game's mechanics. For instance, a unit is not just a single character. A unit is a group of characters moving and fighting together. This game starts you out with only 2 characters per unit, and as you level up you can expand and gradually increase your unit size from 2 to 3, then 4, then 5. So the complexity of battles at the beginning of the game, where they're only 2 versus 2, is much less than when it's 5 on 5. Not to mention the massive variety of character classes, all of their unique and passive abilities all firing at once in succession. Battles can get really dense, and if you were to do what the prologue does and show someone an encounter from the end of the game before they are really introduced to any of the mechanics, it would look incomprehensible. The slow drip feed of mechanics really helps here. Unit formation is one of the most important things in combat. The game encourages varied setups where different character classes support each other to be most effective in battle, and different combinations of units work better than others. You could easily make an entire unit of all cavalry if you really wanted to, but if you encounter an enemy and don't have a character that covers your group's weaknesses, you're going to have a hard time. On easy and normal modes, you can easily play around with the different character combinations of units until you have a setup you like, and strategically deploy those units against enemies they're effective against. However, if you're a maniac and playing this game on hard mode or even the true Zenoiran run, there's nothing stopping you from entering a battle, looking at the enemy unit composition, backing out of the battle to the overworld for no penalty at all, and then readjusting your units for every single battle for complete optimization. The differences in strategies between playing the game on easy versus playing it on hard in terms of what is necessary and what the game expects out of you might as well make it two completely different games. It's also perfect for hardcore old school Fire Emblem fans who are obsessed with challenge, optimization, and min-maxing. Also, items just feel extremely busted in this game. Being able to use items over and over without much of a penalty is extremely strong, especially when an item has a party-wide effect. Using the Hollowed Corn Ash to give myself extra Valor points felt extremely overpowered considering how easily you can get large quantities of that item. Unlike classic Fire Emblem and other strategy RPGs like Valkyria Chronicles, this game actually has plenty of opportunities outside the main story chapters to grind and gather resources. So inherently, the ability to prepare yourself is a quality of life decision that helps this game a lot. I think overall the game's design is a very cool microcosm of difficulty in games, and something that I really want to expound upon in a future video. As far as the story goes, I did enjoy the story quite a bit, but it didn't exactly have me on the edge of my seat with any kinds of crazy twists or anything like that. It was very enjoyable at best and unremarkable at worst. Without going into spoilers, I initially took issue with the way in which you recruit the characters you defeat. Like, my suspension of disbelief can only take me so far in convincing me that someone can all of a sudden abandon their cause and fight for the enemy because they were supposedly brainwashed the whole time. There's a lot more to it than that, and regardless, I was pleasantly surprised in many ways the story circumvents that expectation in the later parts of the game. The boss of the map you just cleared is not always going to be recruitable after beating them, either because they have their own personal convictions they're trying to adhere to, or they're having an existential crisis due to the realization of the atrocities they've committed under Zenoiran control. Another thing I appreciated about the story is since this game doesn't have permanent unit death, lots of your characters actually continue to have an active role in the story in the later parts of the game, something that isn't possible in other strategy RPGs where permanent death is a thing. It's very refreshing to have a character you recruited in Hour 4 of the game be able to comment on the events of the story during Hour 40. In conclusion, this about sums up my thoughts on Unicorn Overlord. In short, I highly recommend it. I'm extremely relieved to see that a game like this is still being made in this day and age where graphical fidelity and online features dominate the industry. This game is tailor-made for my taste, and I couldn't be more grateful that it exists.